the same way. Some of these functions arguably fall away, the CSD, some of the custodians, but for now it looks like they're all remaining in place. But there are some things about this world which hopefully will bring some efficiencies. So a few things we think will happen. So corporate actions being on chain will allow these to flow a lot more in a lot more straightforward fashion. Settlement of transactions, so DVP being based on chain. And then also, when a digital currency comes about, the ability to process corporate actions backwards and forwards should speed up as well. But probably the most compelling thing we think is going to happen in the short term is that rather than all of the old communication methodologies, everyone can start running their own nodes on a different blockchain. So rather than having a lot of information flowing backwards and forwards, the idea being that everybody can independently verify all the transactions themselves on a more real-time basis. So just a little bit about where we sit in the value chain and how we see it operating. So typically you start off with an issuer, so the entity that wants to create the security token. So Archax, for example, is creating a token at the end of this year when we do our STO. We have to work out the parameters. Ours is an equity token. Some people might be issuing a debt token. Who do you want to distribute to? Are there any regulatory restrictions? And they all have to be designed on the security. And then you need to partner with a tokenizer, someone like Tokeny or Securitize that we talked about. They'll take all of your parameters and regulations and build it into the smart contract themselves to try and make them operate as efficiently as possible. From there, you might need some distribution. So at the moment, we're seeing a lot of people in the first two places creating their security tokens, a limited amount of distribution at the moment, but ultimately there's a lot of people moving into this space. We know of about 150 companies operating somewhere between the tokenization and the primary issuance space. It's hugely disruptive to the investment banking model of raising money on new issuances. The underlying registrar, as Rob mentioned just now, there needs to be an underlying registrar, maintain the ultimate ownership, so it operates slightly differently in different jurisdictions, but there needs to be a full registry all the time. The administration, which is the processing of the corporate actions, so any time there's a dividend payment or a yield payment, it needs to be communicated back through the whole value chain. In Europe, we have a CSD, which any security that's registered on a market, a secondary market for trading needs to be registered at CSD. And then finally, you've got Archax at the end as a secondary market. It's super important to understand the value chain, and there's different people in different parts. But one of the most important things that comes out of it from our point of view is how can we distinguish a digital security between a crypto? Because a lot of people ask us about, is there a problem with custody? Is there a problem with security? And actually, digital securities are so much more secure for two main reasons. So firstly, in the tokenization piece, building in the whitelist so that you've got an approved ecosystem, so it can only be traded with approved counterparties, means that it's very hard for it to be transferred outside of that approved list. And secondly, we talked about it just now, the ability to burn and reissue tokens to kind of reverse transactions means that ultimately, if someone obtains the tokens nefariously, then you can transfer them back to the correct owner. So one of the words a lot of people talk about is interoperability in the space, and what they really mean is how does everyone in that value chain talk to each other. So we've been speaking to a lot of tokenizers. A lot of the tokenizers have a lot of different standards. So there's the verified token standard. Tokeny here have their T-Rex. Securitizer working on their standard, and they're all good and they're all heading in the same direction. But at the moment, there's kind of no common ground. So it's really hard for us to know how we should build the exchange. So we need to be able to build it to operate with as many of these standards as possible. In terms of the administration, there's the corporate actions, so the ability to work with the administrators to receive information on the corporate actions, to take elections from our participants and then flow them back up to the administrators, and the regulatory reporting. So obviously we're based in London, so the FCA is a huge amount of regulatory reporting to do there. But we're trying to be a global exchange, so ultimately we need to be aware of all the domestic issuers requirements as well as potentially any buyers or sellers. And then on top of this as well, you've obviously got all the tax reporting from many jurisdictions. And then finally, the share registrar. So out of London, we're able to maintain our own share registry and then relay it to a CSD on a regular basis. For some places, it needs to be communicated back on a real-time basis. So one of the things that the FCA has made clear to us is that we have to perform substantial due diligence. And a lot of this is driven out of the quality of the projects in the crypto world. So it's arguable whether there was any significant due diligence done then, but certainly you have a lot of times where ratings agencies were paid by the issuer to rate their products, and there was, it's arguable whether there was any underlying value. So for the most part, this is the same as you'd expect on any investment assessment. So you look at the financial projections, the business model, the counterparties, the team, etc. But where this differs slightly is looking at the technology as well. So if someone, for example, the protocol used, so someone's issuing a property-backed token and they're paying coupon payments, is it the most appropriate protocol to use? Someone needs to assess the contract source code to make sure it has this built in, make sure the parameters are built in correctly. It's quite a difficult thing to do. There's some people doing the independent assessment right now. The FCA has made it pretty clear to us that we need to assess everyone that comes onto our platform. And at the moment, we're doing this. I've spoken to a few people today have asked, is it similar to the traditional listing world? And it kind of will be over time. So you're starting to get these independent ratings agencies, Security Token Network, that are here. They're working on something similar, whereas sponsoring brokers will start to move into this space and start to underwrite these projects. So there's a few, everyone keeps asking the use cases for tokenization, and there's the ones that we often talk about. So 24/7 trading, bringing liquidity to the space, fractional ownership, and it's true that they can exist in the token world, but they probably could have been achieved in the old world. You could have pretty much put any asset in an SPV, issued hundreds of shares, and you would have got most of the way there. For me, the more exciting parts come when you talk about the efficiencies, so the ability to process corporate actions on a regular basis, to pay dividends straight through to the owner's wallets, to let people elect whether they want cash or shares, to make them allowed to vote on a real-time basis. I think that ability means that I can see the benefit from one corporate action, but when you start looking at multiple corporate actions throughout the year as well, it really makes it much more frictionless. And the second one is as well the back office efficiency. And one of the most compelling reasons, when we talked earlier through that investment management trade, in that diagram you had the hedge fund, you had the broker, the prime broker, the administrator, everyone maintaining their own independent records. When actually, if you just do the trade on the blockchain and you've got one independent set of records that's been signed off by both parties to a trade, then suddenly you get rid of the need for all of the reconciliations between parties. Now, I spent most of my life reconciling trades, pre-matching trades, matching to all the different counterparties, and the idea of there being one central source of truth is huge, and that's why a lot of banks are focusing on the efficiency area. Just a quick example of something we're seeing. So one of the ones in London that's going to be listed on Archax, there's a 15 million student accommodation based out of Nottingham. They've taken 30% of the equity, so they've got, and they're issuing 1 million of that onto the blockchain. So they're just listing a security token. It's already fully occupied. It's it's always for the students. So it's a great use case for a token. And why I quite like it is that previously none of us really would have had access to this sort of investment at all, unless you're participating in a club deal, unless you're a big syndicated investment. And it's quite exciting to think of the different number of opportunities like this in all the different asset classes that probably exist globally that we're hopefully all now going to have access to. And when we look at the products that we think are being traded on these exchanges, we think of it as a liquidity spectrum. So we're very much on the left-hand side at the moment. So we're seeing a lot of property, private equity funds, all of the things that traditionally just are pretty illiquid. And we think the reason that they're the most compelling use cases for tokenization is just because there are more advantages. So you've got the liquidity aspect. So Rob's chosen to tokenize his City fund. He's got a fund on at the moment, so it creates liquidity. There might not be any in the short term, but there'll certainly be more than there would be in a traditional VC firm, which can be quite attractive to people participating. There's a capital raising aspect that just didn't exist before. So we saw it in the ITO craze. We've got a lot of SME companies that now suddenly have access to global capital markets. And if done in the right way, you can have access to everyone from retail through to institutional, depending on the way that you market your product. And the efficiency aspect as well. So the ability to monitor your cap table all the time, to process the corporate actions as we talked about before. There are a lot of advantages, but we're starting to see it slightly shift up to the right. So we've been approached in London by a couple of AIM companies that have gone to AIM through a capital market in the past. They raised some money, but actually there's hardly any liquidity there. They need to raise some more funds, so they want to go out to a new global market. And some hedge funds that kind of have semi-annual liquidity, so they can redeem every 6 months, but actually they would like to have more regular liquidity as well, so it's shifting that way. And then finally, at the other end of the spectrum, you've got all listed securities. So stuff like Apple, Amazon, they're already heavily traded, blue chip stocks. There's still a great use case for them to be tokenized because of the efficiency of corporate actions, because of their because of just their ability to be more efficient in the way that they deal with the market infrastructure. So we talked about the advantages earlier. 6 exchanges in Switzerland, for example, are reprogramming the whole of their infrastructure from the back office through to the front on the blockchain. And when the market infrastructure starts changing, all of the issuers probably will too. And I guess ultimately where that leads us is, if you just consider everything from the most illiquid asset through to the most liquid, there's not an asset really that we don't think benefits from being traded on the blockchain. So ultimately we see a situation where every asset everywhere can be traded in this way. I genuinely think in 10 years' time that people won't be talking about token issuances, it will just be done on chain just because it's a more efficient technology to do it. So obviously that's you know, all rainbows and sunshine, but actually there's quite a lot of challenges at the moment for us. So from a liquidity point of view, we're asked about it quite a lot, and at the very illiquid end of that spectrum, there really isn't much interest from the large market makers at the moment. They can't arb between exchanges. There's not much data for them to base their decisions on. So you know, there's a lot of small market makers willing to enter that space, but it's mainly on a retainer basis. So that area will take some time to develop. You know, I'm not standing here saying there's going to be loads of liquidity. There will just be more liquidity than there is currently in those illiquid assets. Regulations evolving all the time. So in the UK, we're quite fortunate. The FCA is our only regulator. They're quite measured. They're quite easy to work with. But obviously, our vision for Archax is a marketplace where every asset globally can be available to everyone. And obviously, with that comes a lot of challenges. So understanding how regulation is shifting globally, not only in each independent jurisdiction, but how they work together is a bit of a challenge. The interoperability, so we mentioned earlier about the different standards between the different parts of the value chain. Everyone has their preferred protocols. Some people like public, some people like private permissions. You know, it's quite hard to work out how this is going to play out, and that area needs to come together in some sort of standard. It feels like everyone's heading in the same direction, at least at the moment. And then finally, a reliance on the ecosystem. So we're reliant on guys like Tokeny, Securitize, CSDs, the custodians, all moving at the same time as us, so that when we come to market towards the end of this year, that hopefully the full value chain is available. So just a really quick bit about us. So you know, we're trying to put together the most institutional offering that we can. We're based out of London, regulated by the FCA. We're trying to take all of the controls and processes from our traditional world and put them into an exchange. We think that institutions have always wanted to get into the crypto area, even back when it was utility tokens, but the problem is finding a transparent quality partner that any of them can deal with. So you know, we're working with an experienced team. We've got independent segregated custody, independent KYC ML checks, everything you think should be in place. We were the first in London to apply to the FCA for our MTF permission, which is like our exchange permission earlier in this year. So we think we should get it towards the end of this year, and hopefully we'll be the first in the UK regulating this space. Just a quick bit about our landscape. There's tons of crypto exchanges out there. Some are decentralized. We're very much in the centralized bucket. If you look in the centralized bucket, there's a lot focused on retail. Some are more focused on institutional. We're very much in the institutional space. We're very much focusing on security tokens. There are even fewer participants in this space just because the regulatory bar is a lot higher. It makes it more difficult. And then out of London, we're pretty much the only one at the moment. So it's a pretty good place to be. So a lot of people think this space is saturated, but actually operating in the institutional security token space, there are very few. And you know, I'm not so familiar with Asia, but in any region you look in at the moment, there are very limited numbers of securities exchanges popping up, but the ones that do seem to exist seem to be fairly credible. So that's it from me. So the three of us are here for the conference, so feel free to reach out to us anytime. We've got time for questions?
Yeah. So thank you very much. That was excellent. Maybe a quick applause for Graham. Time for one or two questions. There's one up there already. Thank you.
Hi, Graham. My name is Wissam. I'm at CLSA. So, just a question: when you were presenting the evolution of the architectures between traditional exchanges and crypto exchanges, and finally security token exchanges, it looks like you're positioning Archax as just the sort of front-end exchange part. I was wondering, isn't there maybe a lost opportunity of maybe consolidating some of the other functions like the clearinghouse, the issuer? You could have done these things within your entity, and have a result which is more consolidated. Was that a conscious decision not to do that?
Yeah, no, so we're focused very much on the secondary market, and you're absolutely right, there's a lot of opportunities there, and we don't want to be reliant on the whole ecosystem. So actually we've applied for our brokerage permissions, which means we could do primary issuance, our custody permissions, our secondary market permissions, and our derivatives permissions. So we try to cover everywhere we think the market will go, but now we're very much focused on the secondary market. But it's a great point. And so one of the reasons we applied for the custody permissions is in crypto, there's a bunch of custody solutions out there. They're pretty easy to find, but finding ones that can specifically deal with the tasks of security tokens, they're regulated, you're able to deploy them internally, so there's no third-party counterparty risks. It's quite difficult. So we decided to apply for ourselves. We're going to put the software internally and take over some of those pieces. There are other areas in the value chain which are more difficult. So CSD, I mean, there's only really one in the UK. They're very hard to replicate. It's arguable whether you ever need a CSD in the future, but at the moment it's built into regulation. In terms of the clearinghouse, I'd love to be one. We don't have the balance sheet at the moment, but I'm hoping someone will move into that space in the future so that we can move away from having fully funded positions and start to looking at settlement on the blockchain.
Thank you. Any more questions? If not, oh, there's one. Yes. Over there in the middle.
Thank you, Graham. One quick question. So, earlier you were talking about cross-border listing of different STOs. So we just launched one off of securitized US compliant offering, right? So one specific question I have is that how would we be able to list our token on your exchange? And how would that comply with FCA in terms of reporting and ongoing requirements, right?
Yeah, so I'm not an expert in every jurisdiction, so we've got a memorandum of understanding with Securitize. So there's absolutely a willingness to work together on both sides. We're part of the Securitize Ready program. The truth is we need to just understand the regulation for both sides in terms of the issuer, the location of the trading venue, and the buyer and the seller. So I'm not sure of the exact makeup of your token, whether it's a private token or a public token. But if regulation allows, then it should be allowed to be traded around a venue. What I can tell you is from the FCA's point of view, as long as we're just not all non-domestic issuers, we can absolutely have foreign issuances on our platform and available to everyone. We just need to make sure we abide by the regulations globally. So you're welcome to grab me afterwards and talk through your specific instance, but genuinely I think the real value here comes from the democratization of finance. If there is a kind of big objective to Archax, I really love a world where every asset globally is available to everyone. So if I want to invest in coffee shops, I can go into Archax coffee shops and it's available globally, whether it's small private issuances or larger global franchises. I think that's where this becomes exciting to everyone, that kind of no longer is it available only to a few exchange members and large finance houses, but rather everyone can deploy their capital globally.